Hey, Fearless community, I just want to thank you for listening to Fearless Tips and Talks. I am passionate about helping people overcome fear and anxiety, so much so that I wrote a book about overcoming severe panic and anxiety disorder called Nervous Breakthrough. You can find it on Amazon, or you can order a signed copy with a personal message from me at fearlessunite.com/books. And then you click the Fearless Store button. All of this will be linked in the show notes. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to Resilience in the Pews, a pivotal podcast series that dives deep into the intersection of faith, mental health, and the challenges faced within the sacred walls of our churches. Well, hello, Fearless Tips and Talks. We are in a brand new series called Resilience in the Pews, Tackling Anxiety and Church Wounds. And our topic today is going to be explored by a very brilliant woman, in my opinion. Her name is Laura Barringer. She wrote 2 books with her dad, Scott McKnight, and we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. But our topic today, the episode title, is Reimagining the American Church. With the unfortunate wounding that I have experienced within the local church, I often take time to pray and reimagine what the American church could look like. And my guest today made a profound impact on me at a very tender part of my life where I was again struggling with church hurt. This happened in October of last year, and I had the opportunity to give a small part of my testimony to the Julie Roy's Restore Conference to the attendees in Chicago. And you see, anxiety didn't really start because of church hurt for me, but it has been triggered over the years because of it. And the more I share about being wounded by the local church, the more I realize that others are plagued with anxiety because of church hurt as well. So I got to sit under Laura's teaching at the Restore Conference, and her wisdom and just really humble approach to addressing the American church issues that we're facing brought just a profound amount of peace to my soul. I mean, she took the day off of her 9 to 5, which I'm pretty sure she's a kindergartner teacher, right? Is that right? She took the time off to come and talk to us and address it in just such a beautiful, humble way. And I just feel pretty confident that you're going to feel the same way I did about Laura. And that's why I'm so thrilled to introduce to you Laura. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved meeting you here in Chicago. I felt like I connected with you on a soul level, even though it was a short amount of time, and you wrote me such a nice note about anxiety and my struggles with it too. So it really is an honor. It's my honor to be here with you today, and to all your listeners.
Thank you, Laura. So, okay, you wrote a couple of books. I mean, this is a hard thing to do, writing a book myself, but you've written 2 books with your dad. One is called A Church Called TOV, and the other one is Pivot. And the subtitles from these books are just incredible. And I'm going to read them to you. Forming a Goodness Culture That Resists Abuse of Power and Promotes Healing. And then Pivot is the priorities, practices, and powers that can transform your church into a TOV culture. So my first question to you, Laura, is why in the world did you team up with your dad to write these books?
I live in Chicago, outside of Chicago, the suburbs. And my husband and I attended a mega church here called Willow Creek. You and many of your listeners probably have heard of it. We attended there for over 20 years. And in March of 2018, a story broke in the major newspaper here in Chicago, Chicago Tribune, about our former pastor, Bill Hybels, and how he had been accused of sexual harassment of multiple women. And very long story, making it very short. I started to read the article out loud to my husband, and both of us looked at each other and our jaws dropped open because we knew the women, and we knew them to be, it wasn't just one woman, it was multiple women. We knew them to be like people of character. And the church was accusing them of lying and
Mm.
taking, like saying, oh, they're just colluding to take Bill down before he retires. And we, it wasn't like we had an instantaneous, okay, we believe the women, but over the course of a few days, we were like, there's just no way. There's no way that these people would lie. And we had frequent conversations with my dad, who is a theologian, a professor, a prolific author. And he kind of walked our family like through theological truths about what was happening. And
Mm.
just one example is the church was saying, they were throwing out Matthew 18, saying,
Yeah.
if you have a problem with a person, you need to go directly to them. And my dad taught us, like, that's just a misuse of Matthew 18. That's not a situation where it even should be used. And he talked about prophetic action and what they were doing, So um I encouraged him. If he were here, he'd say, well, actually, Laura pestered me to write. And because I felt like everybody within Willow's Reach needed to hear from a theologian, from an authority, established authority on the Bible, about how these women were being mistreated, that the
Mm.
church was actually putting their reputation above wounded people. And he wrote like a blog post that went viral, and then one thing led to the next, and we ended up writing that first book together, a church called TOV. And that book, it really all started with the false narratives that had come out of Willow Creek. But we all know that this is much larger than Willow Creek, that, you've got the SBC, the Roman Catholic Church, like Harvest Bible churches down the road from us too, and that one imploded at the same time. We really wanted to write a redemptive book. So we call out the toxicities, but we also outlined habits of goodness that resist them so that people are cared for and the wounded can be healed. But that book really all came out of, it started with those we called them the false narratives that came out of Willow Creek.
Mm. Laura, I imagine seeing this article come out, and how long at this point had you been at Willow Creek?
So my husband and I attended at Willow Creek for 20 years.
Oh my
And
goodness.
we had left actually before the scandal broke, but we were still very much connected with the people there.
So, since this focus is about church wounding and anxiety, can you describe to our listeners just maybe what did that bubble up inside of you? Like, what kind of tension did you have with maybe how you see God, how you see your spiritual leaders, anxiety that was building up, and perhaps you and your husband? Like, what did that look like for you all?
Well, I still call it disorienting. So
Mm.
naively, for me, this was the first time that I had seen a story like this unfold.
Okay.
I assumed naively that the church would be telling the truth, that when the elders and the pastors and the leaders stood up on stage and publicly said, this isn't true, Bill did not do those things, I naively was convinced, like, okay, well, a church wouldn't lie.
Mm.
And then it was like a ping pong ball. Then we would hear the women or talk to one of them, and we're like, well, they're absolutely telling the truth. And then we'd hear the church make a statement. And the reason I call it disorienting is because I remember the moment I was sitting on our living room couch and I was like, only one side could be telling the truth.
Oh.
And either way, it's really disturbing, but I know it's not the church. I know the church isn't telling the truth. And I was just naive to situations like that. I didn't, at that time in 2018, I didn't know that a church would go to such lengths to bury the truth. that they would be willing to hurt people in the process to protect their reputation. So it was the best way that I can describe it for Mark and my husband and I is we were trying to like wade through the muck, but it was extremely disorienting. And it really the people that were burying the truth intentionally, that really shook me because I thought, oh my gosh, what happened to these people? Like, how did they get here? How does a person get there? How do they become this? And could I become that? Like, what happened?
Mm. Which is why I love you and your father's work so much. It's very redemptive. And it is, the Tov actually means goodness, God's goodness. And so I think what's so important with what you just said is this moment that you're like, the church, surely it won't lie. Surely it can't do that. And I think we have this perspective of what church is and should be, and therefore we can be naive. And what's so beautiful about both of your books is it teaches very clearly what to look out for, what to pay attention for. And in your first book, A Church Called Tov, you guys talk about nurturing habits of goodness. And this was the part of the book where I was like, this is tangible. This is practical. I can understand this. I get this. I can apply this in my everyday life. So I'm going to talk about the nurturing habits of goodness, but there's 3 that I really want to zero in on. So it's this cool like circle, and then it's like, what you should have and the opposite of what it is. So I'm going to just list them real quick. I will link all of these in the show notes. I will link their books in the show notes so that you guys can go and dig into all of this. But this was big moment for me. Okay. So nurturing habits of goodness, nurture empathy. And then the opposite of that would be resist narcissist culture. Then we've got nurture grace, opposite, resist a fear culture. Put people first, opposite, resist institution creep. Tell the truth, resist false narratives. The next one is nurture justice, and then resist the loyalty culture. We're going to zero in on that. Okay. And then nurture service. The next one is resist the celebrity culture. And the last one was nurture Christ-likeness, and then resist the leader culture. So I would love for you to expand on the loyalty, celebrity, and leader. Those were the ones that in my own experience, I saw to be in both of my church wounding situations to be sort of the catalyst or the ones that stood out the most.
Yeah. So Christy, I don't even know where to start. Celebrity is a big one for me because, so I was at Willow Creek for 20 years. I would call we were members. I would call myself pretty actively involved. And it was not until we left Willow Creek and Mark and I started attending, it was a little Anglican church, that I realized, oh my goodness, it was like a light bulb went off of what celebrity culture was. Okay. I had to be out of it to see it. It's like a fish can't see I don't know what that metaphorical saying is, but like, it was almost like I was in it and I was perpetuating it and did not even realize it. But I think it had negative, like, I want to confess that I perpetuated it. Like, sure. I remember one time, it's sort of funny and sort of not. So my husband and I were in the lobby. I think we were talking with friends at Willow Creek, and Bill Hybels walked by, and he walked by. He was the pastor. He walked by with like a team of bodyguards around him. And I literally, I think I gasped, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Bill Hybels. And Mark said to me, he's not a celebrity. Like, he's not famous. And I said, yes, he is. It's Bill Hybels. Like, so was Bill creating the culture? Yes, but people like me were perpetuating. Like, it works together, right? So
that's good.
He might have been behaving like a celebrity, but there I was treating him like one too. And And what happened was like the closer you got, and this I will confess this too, the closer I got to the Hybels family, I felt like, oh, I'm pretty important.
Mm.
Like I know Bill's daughter, and I feel great. I feel good about like I have a sense of value. So that is a red flag that I should have seen in myself that was not healthy, but it was also a symptom. I shouldn't say but, and it was also a symptom of what the culture was like. So the closer you got to that inner circle, the more important you felt.
Mm.
And it's a symptom of a much larger problem. Um, there was a green room backstage where only like certain, and I don't want to like knock on Willow Creek because I don't even know what it's like there now. We don't attend there anymore, and perhaps they've healed in big ways, but it really got my brain thinking a lot about like people are more important than that's not how God sees us. God doesn't see Bill as more important. He doesn't see the people around him as more important. The Hybels family is not more important. All of us are equal in his eyes.
That's right.
And I think I felt prey to that. Like and I did not see it until we left. Like when I wrote about this in Pivot, I befriended on Twitter or X, whatever you call it, like this really gentle soul Quaker pastor. And I was so struck one day, he posted pictures of his church service and they were all in a circle. And you couldn't tell, like you couldn't tell even tell who the pastor was. There was no platform, there was no microphone. They were just sitting in a circle learning about God and talking about God and worshiping God. And it was so contrary to our experience at Willow Creek, where certain people are more important than others. And I will admit I could not see it when I was in it. My husband probably could have told you that had fallen for it, but
well, obviously he called you out right there.
And it's consumeristic too. So like we and I especially, we had become consumers. So like it was like you had this wonderful, amazing weekend, and then you'd expect a greater performance the next weekend. Or if somebody was on stage that you didn't want to hear, then you didn't go that weekend. It was a really bad, ugly rut for a long time.
And what I love about your heart is you're repentive as well. And as I'm hearing you tell the story in my own journey, like I would feel those same things. Oh, the pastor invited us into a meeting, or, oh, I get the opportunity to do XYZ, and checking and being reflective of my own behavior is so important. And if we're going to change this thing as a community, we have to repent for the things that we are perpetuating. I can't say that word right now. But yes, I mean, so I think that's important. What about the leadership one? It's nurture Christ likeness, resist the leader culture. Because I tell you what, the other person that spoke was Lance Ford at the restore, and he just upside down talked about leadership and hierarchy and decentralization. And it just was like, I don't even know how to process everything. And then I go and read your guys' book, and you're talking about it too. So what is the leadership culture? We'll talk about that and why we've stepped off base.
So I will say, during our time at Willow Creek, this is one thing I feel like I did see that should have been a bigger red flag for me. But I remember thinking, all we talk about is the gift of leadership. Like, why is that one more important? What about the gift of hospitality, or the gift of prophecy, or the gift of helping? Like, those are never mentioned, but it was all about developing your leadership and leading where you are. And my dad wrote about this, and I think it was in TOV, not Pivot, where he wrote about how he and Eugene Peterson, author, have been sort of like complaining about this for like decades, that there has been a turn in the church towards, instead of discipleship and pastoring, the pastor is now seen as a leader. and they attend leadership conferences and learn leadership principles from the business world. And it's kind of infiltrated the church. And I forgot where I was going with that. But at one point, I said to my dad, I said, he's a theologian. I said, how many times does Jesus talk about leadership? Just like,
question.
I was like, just as a Bible professor, how many? And he was like, 0. Like,
whoa.
He doesn't really talk. Jesus doesn't talk about leadership. He's like, you could talk about, Paul talks about like the pastor getting up in front of somebody and saying something, and you could make an argument that that's leadership, but there isn't an emphasis in the Bible on being a good leader. And that kind of floored me. And I thought, we would have this big emphasis at Willow Creek on the leadership summit every year, and everybody would attend. And I remember looking around thinking, like, all of us don't have the gift of leadership. We don't. And why are we elevating it? And why are we all working on our leadership? And what about our hospitality or encouragement? Like, it felt very lopsided. But more than anything, it's like what we write about is like an infiltration of business practices and the business model into the church rather than pastors. Pastors have become leaders rather than pastors.
Hey friends, I just wanted to take a moment to interrupt to let you know that the Fearless Tips and Talks podcast is part of a ministry called Fearless Unite. Our mission is to help you find freedom from fear and anxiety in a world that feeds it. We are rolling out a new initiative called Soul Shepherd, which is a mental health advocacy movement in our community. We are very serious about decreasing the mental health crisis that we are facing. And we're going to do this first by starting with teenage girls, one body, soul, and spirit at a time. If you want to learn more about our Soul Shepherd initiative, go to fearlessunite.com/Soul Shepherd. This will also be linked in our show notes. Now, back to the interview. So this was a moment when you were giving your keynote. In the message you gave at the Restore conference, you had a powerful statement. I believe it's a quote from another pastor, but this is what you said. We are more concerned with who is coming to church than what the people are becoming. More concerned about the people that are coming than what they're becoming. And I'm telling you, it was a holy moment when you said that. I was like, wow. But again, I was being self-reflective because I was like, I've been leading a women's ministry since 2016, and thousands of women have come through to our events. And I had to ask myself that question. Is that what I believe too? And oh my goodness, what do I need to change? What do I need to do different? So tell me why that quote was so important and why you shared it with us.
In the process of writing Pivot, my dad had a book sent to my house. It was called Renovation of the Church. And he said, I need you to read this, and then I need you to write about it for Pivot. So I am a teacher, but I grew up writing and I've always loved to write. And so I loved that challenge. Like, I'm going to read and then write about it. Well, I did not expect for my heart and my soul to leap when I read this book. I don't think it's a very well-known book. I had not heard of it before. But it is by two pastors, Kent Carlson and Mike Lucan, and they literally transformed their church. They transformed it from a mega church attractional model to a discipleship spiritual formation model. And that quote came from them. They had a moment when they realized that we have cared more about how many people are coming, like growth. And they were measuring success in numbers. We cared more about that than those people and who those people are becoming. And I know it's stunning. And they used that to transform what the church was. It's called Oak Hills Church in Folsom, California. And they did away with the attractional mega church model, and they decided to focus on discipling people, and they just pushed against the culture and taught them what it looked like to live like Jesus.
And I think I remember in your keynote, you said that they had massive loss in numbers when they switched to this model.
Massive. They had, because the people like me had become consumers. So they said it felt like a monster in the basement. So they would put on this flashy, beautiful weekend service, and it felt to them like it was like an awful feeling, like a monster. Like, now we have to feed the monster. Like, we have to make an even better performance for next weekend. And the people were just coming to a weekend show, but not really developing their relationship with Christ during the week, not really thinking about God or church at all during the week. And so yeah, when they changed their whole model, I think their attendance like cut in half. Their staff was totally confused. Talk about a leadership culture. They had hired people based on their talent and their skill. So the staff is like completely confused. What are we doing? And it was really tumultuous. Like, it was not easy. But what I love about their story is that they own where they were. And they say, like, and I know what this is like, having been in the celebrity culture. They said, we felt really important. We were known by Willow Creek as like up and coming leaders, and people would wait in line to talk with us after a service. And they said our ambition our egos and our ambition were run away. We did not like who we had become. They had read a lot of Dallas Willard and Eugene Peterson. And another quote that stuck out to me so much from their story was, our model of church, our mega church model, was actually working against Christ's invitation for authentic transformation.
Oh, let that sit for just a moment. Do you remember what the maybe top 2 things they did to start switching towards discipleship? Because you would think okay, so yeah, you're a consumer, but you would think that the power of the Holy Spirit would be attracting the people that really wanted to go deeper. And so it's going to cut out the consumers, and it's going to, bring in the people that actually are called to do life with Jesus, I would think. But like, what were the biggest changes? What were the top 2 biggest changes?
I can tell you that the number one top change was the weekend service.
Okay.
That instead of putting on a show, there was no show. They literally talked about from the pulpit what it was like to live like Jesus and with Jesus.
So was the worship with the lights and the haze and all that, they cut it?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I envision the Quaker church, where maybe like you circle up and you all give and you talk. And if you look at the early Acts church, you see that everyone was contributing. Everybody was, someone was giving, a word of prophecy, and someone was giving, a teaching, and everybody comes together. Man, it's so powerful. So in your book, Pivot, you give this really beautiful imagery of a peach tree. And this peach tree symbolizes a healthy church. Could you just explain the peach tree to us, and just the testing of the soil and what all that looks for? Just break down the peach tree, because I was like riveted while you were telling the story of the peach tree.
So a peach tree, and by the way, funny story, we picked a peach tree because I have one in my backyard. When my husband and I moved in 10 years ago, we planted one. And it literally, in 10 years, we've never eaten one peach off of this tree. and like it gets moldy, it gets some weird fungus on it, and it like the branches drop off, and it's we get like these little golf ball sized green peaches that the squirrels run away with. And so when we were thinking of what kind of metaphor could we use, was like, oh, I know, a peach tree, because I've got one in my backyard that's really unhealthy. It'll be perfect for this metaphor. So our peach tree is a metaphor for health of a culture. So when you think of a tree, you've got the trunk and the branches and the leaves and the peaches. Those are all like visible elements of a culture. So like when people come to your organization or church, they can see those things and feel them. So they might feel like, oh, like the people were really friendly, or I liked the music. Those are all visible peaches, like the elements of the culture. The soil is what's underneath that you cannot see, you cannot visibly see. But the soil, and it's a nice, pretty metaphor, but it's actually based on like theoretical research of culture transformation. The soil is what feeds the culture, and it can be toxic or it can be TOV, but what is in the soil determines the health of the entire culture. So, like in my backyard, for example, we do not get healthy peaches. And the problem, I'm not an arborist, but what I've learned is that the problem is not necessarily the peaches or the leaves or the branches. The problem is probably the soil. We don't nurture the soil of the tree. And so therefore we don't get healthy peaches. So the soil, what we have developed in Pivot is an opportunity for groups or churches or organizations, whatever, to dig into their soil and find out what's there, find out what is feeding the tree. Is your tree healthy? Is it not healthy? If it's not, why not? And to have honest conversations about looking at your soil, being honest about what's there and how it's feeding the rest of the tree, the rest of the culture.
So, Laura, the majority of the people that would be listening aren't going to be church leaders. They're going to be just regular church attendees, or maybe they're haven't started going to church yet. They're new in their walk with Jesus. So, is there a way to test the soil if you're just a church attendee? Because you don't get to see behind the scenes. You don't get to be in leadership meetings. You don't get to hear the staff stuff. You don't get to see that. So, is there a way to test the soil when you're just a church attendee? What do you look for?
So we've had this is one of the reasons why we wrote Pivot, because we get a lot of questions. After we wrote a church called TOV, we got a lot of questions about, well, what if I'm just like a lay person? What if I just attend the church? I'm not on staff. I don't have any power or ability to influence. How do I know if there are red flags? Like, what should I look for? And, celebrity culture is really, in my opinion, now that I've been out of it, that's like something that's easy to identify. But like other red flags that you could look for are grace. Are people put first? Does the church nurture service? Does it nurture justice? Does it care about the people around them? And something else that we've written about and like be really honest about is it's not always easy to tell when you're not close to the power. So like a lay person may not always be able to tell if the church initially is toxic, or if there's something toxic like working underneath the soil. And you can't tell because you're not invested, or I shouldn't say invested, but you're not close to the decision makers, right? But there are things, we call them pockets of TOV, where you can live TOVly in the circle of goodness. You can create that community, like whether it's a small group or close friends, where you can create your own circle, your own pocket of TOV, where you do yourself nurture empathy and grace, and you teach how to put people first and tell the truth and learn how to live like Christ. Even if you can't tell what the larger culture is like, you can still do that for yourself.
And in the back of the book, there's a quiz that you can go through, and it is designed for church leaders. But I feel like if you are a layperson or you're just right, you can take that quiz yourself and just be aware. Just know this is what I'm looking for in a church. Like, I'm looking for justice. I'm looking for, equality. I'm looking for great. These are the things that I'm looking for. And so I have found that quiz. I mean, I'm applying it for our own ministry and organization, but I think for just the normal person, you look at that quiz and just say, okay, it's like, I'm taking this as an interview, like I'm bringing this to the church, and these are the things that I'm looking for over time. So that's so good. So there's a lot of study that indicates that humans can't have more than like 100 to 150 relationships. So when it comes to the church, and we're talking about like everything kind of gets clogged up at the top, that you've got the lead pastor, the executive pastor, that all the pastors are up at the top, right? And you've got this hierarchy of leadership that goes up. And then you've got the mega church model where you've got thousands and thousands of people coming to church. Do you really believe that the megachurch model can work? I mean, how do you have a healthy TOV church when you've got maybe a staff of 20 or more people that are trying to care for thousands and thousands of people? Like, how does that actually work? Do you think that it can work? And kind of talk about just what that would look like.
So, Christy, when you were talking, I was thinking about Lance Ford's talk when he was talking about executive pastors.
Yes.
I have not been able to get that out of my head.
Me either, girl.
I've been thinking, should we even be having executive pastors? And that made such a profound impact on me. And as you were asking that question, his talk came back to me all of a sudden. So look, I don't have, and I'm not an authority on the church. Like I said, I'm an educator. I'm not trained as a church authority. I've not been to seminary. I just have followed where I feel the Spirit has led me, and I've become an advocate for those who have been wounded, and written and spoken on this topic. I don't have anything against the megachurch. I really don't. In fact, when we wrote a church called TOV, we had a megachurch pastor read it before it went to publication, and he felt that we were too hard on megachurches. He said, they're not all bad. And he's like, I don't think you're trying to come across this way, but it sounds like you're being too tough on them. And so we eased up a little bit. For me, my personal opinion is that it all comes down to the goodness of the people of the pastor. So I think that in a megachurch model, I can see from my experience how it would be tempting to fall prey to the lure of feeling like a celebrity, of feeling important, of flying in a private plane, of getting paid a lot of, like, I can see how any of us, we're taught in the Bible that we have an evil heart, right? The heart is evil. And so I'm not judging anybody for falling prey to it, but like, I think it's a big temptation of a celebrity, of a mega church pastor, and it has to be a person of really good character who can resist that. And I'm sure that some do. And they hopefully have healthy churches. I have had a negative megachurch experience. I did not. I fell right in with the celebrity culture. So I don't know, like, Mark and I, we don't attend a mega church right now, and maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't, but I don't think it's either a right or a wrong. I think it's like, who is the pastor, and does that pastor have the character to withstand the temptation of being placed on a pedestal?
And perhaps everybody else underneath too.
Right.
Because
Because we found it's not just the leader. There's usually there's always what we call them retainers around them that perpetuate the culture. And I will say, we wrote about this in TOV, like they influence each other. Like the congregation perpetuates the culture just as much as the celebrity perpetuates. They go both ways. It's like my example of Googling over Bill Hybels in the hallway. Like we both were perpetuating the culture.
yeah, that's good. As we kind of close out, Laura, is there any advice you would give to someone that is struggling with anxiety, losing hope, just feeling like they can't trust the church again? What would be your best piece of advice for them?
So I'm an anxiety sufferer myself. I have been asked a lot over the last few years since a church called TOV came out, are you mad at God? Because without exaggeration, my dad and I got from just private messages, story after story of people who had been abused by the church. And we wrote a lot about sexual abuse, but the stories that we get are almost, I would say, 90% power abuse, where they are stories of a leader misusing their power in the name of God. And I want to say wounding, but it's more like traumatizing people. And people are like, and I understand what that's like. When my husband and I like went through like a difficult period in our marriage and then returned to church, like it was really like, I remember how it felt. Like I felt the anxiety and the trauma in my body. Like, and these were people that like welcomed us back to church, hugged us and loved us and were glad we were there. But like my heart was pounding. I looked at us in the middle of the service at one point and we were like grasping each other's hand. Like we were, and it ended and we like could not get out of there fast enough. So it's like you feel it in your body. So I've never been mad at God. Of all the stories that I've heard, and I think I've heard hundreds over the last few years, I'm not mad at God. It's not God. God, this is a part of the reason why we wrote a church called TOV and Pivot, is because we wanted people to know that's not him. He doesn't abuse. He doesn't lie. He doesn't make a narrative up to cover up the truth. He is the light. He is the truth. He is so good, and he wants people to live in goodness, to follow after our example of Jesus, right? And so I understand the anxiety. I understand the trauma. A lot of it surrounding church, for like from what I've heard and from what I've experienced myself. And that is the hope that I have, is that you can trust him. The leaders may have let you down. They've let us down. The community, the culture may have let you down, but he does not, and he will not. And I have such hope in that.
That's so good. Thank you. And again, why your words are so peaceful to my soul, because it's true. People might let you down, the culture might let you down, but man, God is good and he loves you and he will never let you down. So don't give up on the church, the capital C church, just because maybe the little c church has hurt you or wounded you. And it's true that trauma does, it triggers inside your body. There'll be messages I'll sit through or certain things that will be said to me, and all of a sudden I feel the pain and the wounding from the past come back. So my encouragement, friends, would be to seek counseling, to talk through it, to journal, and to be bold and brave enough to share your story. That has been my experience, and then why I'm putting this series together is because when I did open up, I had message after message after message of people saying, me too, me too. And when we can come together and talk about it, but then trust God to heal us and don't back away from God, still move towards God, then we can actually work towards the healing. And now look, like what Laura is doing with her dad, they're like helping be the change. They're bringing to the light things that need to change. And that is so hopeful to me. Laura, I don't know how you feel about this, but would you mind praying over our people before we end today?
Yeah, I would love to.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, you have brought us here together to a new day. We are so grateful for your mercies, your tenderness, and your goodness. I am so grateful for Christy, for the ministry that she has launched to meet those who wrestle with anxiety. You know my anxiety too, God. And I thank you that you know everything about us, that you love us unconditionally for who we are. And I pray that you would remind us, Lord Jesus, that in the midst of church hurt and trauma, remind us that people may let us down, communities may let us down, but that is not who you are, that you are a God of truth. You are a God of light. You bring light where there is darkness, and may we hold fast to that and be reminded of your truth as we walk together through this day. And we give all of this to you, Lord, and I pray huge blessings over Christy and over her ministry and over all of her listeners. In your name, amen.
Thank you so much for your time today, Laura.
Thank you.
If you found this to be helpful, will you help us get the word out about this podcast? I would be so honored if you would share it with your loved ones, rate it, review it, and also be sure to subscribe. And lastly, and I really mean this, we want to hear from you. If you have suggestions or ideas on something that I should cover or a tip that you'd really like help on, please send us an email, podcast@fearlessunite.com. Again, that's podcast@fearlessunite.com. Thank you so much for listening.